They laughed when she said she was special forces, called her a media stunt, a joke. She didn't argue, didn't flinch. But in her eyes burned a fire no one saw, a fire ready to turn doubt into ashes. This is her journey. From mockery to the moment that changed everything. When she alone saved her team on the razor's edge of life and death. Let's dive in. The story begins in a place where doubt weighed heavier than the dust on her combat boots. At a small outpost in northern Syria, near the Turkish border, where dry winds carried sand and whispered malice. A UNDIS, Special Forces team prepared for a classified mission. Their task sounded simple: scout and support the destruction of a smuggled weapons route. But nothing in this land was ever simple. She walked into the camp, backpack heavy on her shoulders, boots caked with mud from days of marching. Sergeant Natalie Raines, 34, is the only female operator in the team. She wasn't new. She'd survived the brutal Q course, where even the strongest men could break. Afghanistan had forged her through long nights of ambushes and blood-soaked days. But here, at this outpost, none of that seemed to matter. The moment she stepped in, eyes flicked her way. A voice rang out, loud enough for the whole camp to hear. "She's just here to check the diversity box." Another sneered, adding, "Bet they needed a woman for the propaganda posters." Laughter spread, not loud, but sharp as a blade. Natalie said nothing. She tightened her backpack straps, checked her rifle for the third time, as if that was her answer. Her movements were slow, precise, and unshaken. But her eyes, for a fleeting moment, memorized every face, every word. The outpost sat in a barren land, where low hills were eroded by wind and war. The camp was a makeshift setup of concrete blocks and corrugated metal, surrounded by rusted barbed wire. The team of 8 was all seasoned warriors, but none had worked with a female operator before. To them, Natalie was a question mark, or worse, a punchline. The team leader, Captain Marshall, was the only one who didn't join the mockery. But he didn't defend her either. "Do your job, Raines," he said, his voice flat, as if she were just another item on his checklist. On her first day, they gave her simple tasks, checking equipment and assisting with logistics. No one invited her to the tactical meeting that night. She stood outside the tent, catching fragments of voices discussing terrain and the route they'd take. A young soldier, buzz-cut and cocky, glanced at her and muttered to his buddy, "Who does she think she is, female Rambo?" The laughter came again, quieter this time, but still loud enough for her to hear. Natalie didn't react. She returned to her corner, opened her backpack, and pulled out a worn-edged paper map. Under the dim glow of her flashlight, she started marking notes, her pencil lines thin but steady. She didn't need their trust. She was used to doubt. In Afghanistan, she'd heard the same words, seen the same looks, but she also knew, in places like this where life and death were a split second apart, words meant nothing, actions did. She sat there in the dark, long after the team had gone to sleep. The wind howled through the tense gaps, like a warning. She studied the map, her finger tracing the contours of the ravine they'd passed through. Something felt off. She couldn't pinpoint it, but her instincts, those that had saved her and her teammates before, were screaming. She cross-checked data from an old UAV feed, one no one else bothered to review. A small detail stood out: a patch of open ground in the satellite imagery. Too flat, too clean. She jotted it down, knowing that tomorrow, if she tried to tell anyone, they'd probably just laugh. The next day, as the team geared up to move out, Natalie stood at the end of the line, backpack on, rifle steady in her hands. A soldier passed by, clapped her shoulder and joked, "Hang in there, Raines, don't make us come back to save you. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She knew, in the days ahead, they'd need her more than they realized. And she was ready. Natalie Raines' story didn't start with the taunts, but with what she chose to do next. In a place where doubt was the easiest thing to find, she carried something rarer resolve. And in the darkest hours, when everything seemed to crumble, that resolve would change everything. The sky over northern Syria was stained ash gray, as if the world itself held its breath. The small outpost sat among barren hills, where the wind's howl through rusted barbed wire was the only sound breaking the silence. Natalie Raines stood alone by the gear pile, checking her ammo belts and wiping the scope of her rifle clean. She worked quietly, a faint shadow among the other soldiers laughing, sharing stories of old missions. No one invited her to join. No one looked her way, except for fleeting glances laced with curiosity and doubt. The Special Forces team had their orders march through a narrow ravine to scout a suspected weapons smuggling route. The mission sounded straightforward, but Natalie knew nothing in this land was easy. She'd spotted irregularities on the map, small details the team overlooked, but when she tried to mention them at the morning brief, her voice was drowned by a soft chuckle from a soldier at the back. "You've watched too many movies. Raines," he said, his tone half joking, half mocking. "This isn't Call of Duty." The others said nothing, but their eyes spoke volumes. She didn't belong here, at least not to them. Natalie didn't argue. She returned to her spot, her gaze fixed on the map spread across the table. Under the dim glow of a hanging lamp, she traced the ravine's contours, marking potential risks. She cross-checked data from an old UAV feed, one that the team dismissed as outdated. A patch of open ground in the satellite imagery stood out too flat, too clean, as if someone had deliberately cleared it. She noted it, knowing if she brought it up, she'd likely get a shrug or another joke. In the team, she was treated as an outsider. She wasn't given the detailed intel briefings the others received as routine. When the formation was set, she was shoved into reserve tail-end rear guard, the least critical role. Small tactical meetings happened in the tent, but no one called her in. She stood outside, catching snippets of voices discussing routes and contingencies if they met the enemy. Once, she tried stepping in, notes in hand, but a young soldier, buzz-cut and smirking, stopped her with a faint grin. "We've got this, Raines, just follow along." She didn't react. She went back to her corner, opened her backpack, and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were meticulous entries: terrain, wind direction, estimated travel times. She didn't need their trust, but she needed to be ready. She checked her comms gear, ensuring everything worked perfectly. She knew, in a place like this, one small mistake could cost the team their lives. The night before the march, the air in the tent grew heavy. Soldiers sat around the table, sharing stories of family and old battles. Natalie sat in the corner, quietly folding her map. One soldier, maybe out of curiosity, approached. "What's got you so focused?" "Raines," he asked, his tone not quite hostile but far from friendly. She looked up, her eyes calm. "Just making sure," she said, then returned to her notebook. He shrugged, walked off, and muttered to his buddy, "She's trying to act important." Natalie heard but didn't care. She was used to words like those from her early days in Afghanistan, where she had to prove herself every second. She knew words didn't matter. What mattered was what would happen when the team entered the ravine, when darkness swallowed them, when things went off plan. She checked her rifle one last time, careful as a ritual. ammo belts neatly arranged, scope spotless, everything ready. When the team went to sleep, Natalie stayed awake. She sat under the faint light, reviewing her notes. Something felt wrong, she could sense it. Her instincts, the ones that had saved her and her teammates through long nights in Afghanistan, were screaming. She couldn't name it, but she knew that when the team started marching, everything would change. She closed her notebook, tucked it into her backpack, and shut her eyes. Not to sleep, but to prepare. She knew tomorrow would demand more than patience, and she was ready to show them, whether they believed her or not. The sun barely crested the barren hills of northern Syria, its weak light failing to chase away the biting cold. The 8-man Special Forces team prepared in silence, their shadows stretching long across the rocky ground. The faint clink of metal sounded as they checked rifles, ammo, and comms gear. Few words were spoken. The air was heavy, not just with the mission ahead, but with the tense silence between them. Natalie Raines stood at the rear, her backpack weighing on her shoulder. Her eyes scanning the ravine ahead. She said nothing, but in her mind, every detail of the map, every note from last night, burned clear. The mission was underway. They were to march through a narrow ravine, reported as low risk by higher-ups. The team leader, Captain Marshall, made a point with steady strides, his voice even on the radio. Maintain formation, 5-meter spread, eyes sharp. The soldiers nodded, rifles ready, and began to move. Natalie brought up the rear, her reserve role leaving her nearly detached from the team. She didn't complain. Instead, she observed every step, every mark in the dirt, every sound in the air. The ravine was tight and long, flanked by sheer cliffs, as if nature itself had carved a trap. No wind, no birds, just the steady crunch of boots on gravel. Natalie felt uneasy. The terrain was too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. She glanced down, spotting faint tire tracks, fresh but unnoted in the intel reports. She checked the wind direction, noting no cross-signal interference, a telltale sign of nearby electronics. Her instincts screamed, but she knew speaking up now would only earn a dismissive glare. She tried moving forward, speaking softly to the soldier ahead, a sergeant named Carter. Notice anything off the ground? It's got fresh marks. Carter turned, frowning, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Don't panic. Raines, you're Special Forces. Remember, he turned away, kept walking, as if her words were a nuisance. Natalie tightened her grip on her rifle, saying no more. She knew arguing was pointless. Instead, she quietly adjusted her ammo belts, arranging them in a counter-ambush pattern, a technique only combat veterans used. Her movements were swift, precise, and unnoticed by the team. The team pressed on, their shadows shrinking in the ravine. Sunlight was blocked by the cliffs, leaving patches of cold darkness. Natalie maintained her distance, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain. Something was wrong. She noticed a rocky outcrop ahead, where the soil looked slightly disturbed, as if someone had tried to hide their tracks. She wanted to halt the team and check it, but she knew they wouldn't listen. Captain Marshall, though he didn't openly mock her like the others, had been clear. Do your job. Raines, and she was in her own way. She checked her radio, ensuring it worked. She adjusted her scope, calculating distances to potential sniper positions. Everything she did was quiet, blending into the darkness around her. Carter, the soldier ahead, turned back once more, his voice teasing. Gonna play hero, Raines, relax, there's nothing out here. She didn't respond, she just nodded slightly, her eyes fixed on the outcrop ahead. As the team ventured deeper into the ravine, the air grew stifling. Natalie felt pressure on her chest, not fear, but the certainty that they were walking into a place where everything could collapse. She looked at the soldiers ahead, the ones who'd mocked her and ignored her. They didn't know, but she was ready, not to prove them wrong, but to ensure they survived. She gripped her rifle tightly, her steps steady, her eyes never leaving the darkness ahead. The ravine, with its deadly silence, was waiting. And Natalie Raines, though dismissed by her team, was waiting too, not to answer with words, but with actions. The ravine was a natural trap, its sheer cliffs swallowing the sunlight, leaving the Special Forces team in a cold, shadowed void. The steady crunch of 8 soldiers' boots echoed in the deadly silence, but none of them realized they were marching into a real trap. Natalie Raines, at the rear, felt it in every heartbeat. Her instincts, honed through years in Afghanistan, screamed. She'd seen the signs: faint tire tracks, disturbed soil, the too perfect silence, but no one listened. And then, in an instant, everything erupted. A deafening blast tore through the air. Improvised mines detonated mid-formation, rocks and dirt spraying, and smoke choking the ravine. 2 soldiers up front collapsed, blood pooling beneath them. Sniper fire cracked from both ends of the ravine, cold and precise, as if the enemy knew exactly where they'd be. The team's main radio was destroyed, signals cut. Chaos swallowed them. Captain Marshall, the team leader, crumpled, clutching his leg, his face pale with pain. The remaining soldiers scattered, seeking cover, but there was no plan, no coordination. Shouts, gunfire, and falling rocks merged into a symphony of despair. In that moment, Natalie acted. She rolled out of the line of fire, her body hugging the ground, dodging bullets slicing the air. She didn't shout, didn't call out, didn't wait for orders. Her eyes scanned the terrain, gauging wind direction, calculating the snipers' positions from bullet angles. In her mind, everything was clear, a living map. She knew if she didn't move now, the team would be wiped out. Silently, she adjusted her ammo belts, checked her scope, and began to move. She didn't ask for backup. She became the backup. Natalie crawled over a rocky outcrop, using the smoke as cover. She baited the enemy's fire, letting them catch fleeting glimpses of her to draw shots away from the pinned-down soldiers. In 90 seconds, a time that felt like a lifetime to others, she neutralized both sniper nests. First, she tossed a smoke grenade to obscure their view, then flanked through a blind spot along the cliff. One precise shot ended the first sniper. The second was trickier, hidden behind a boulder, but she'd planned for it. She rolled down a small slope, approached from below, and took him out before he could react. As the smoke cleared, she stood, her breathing steady despite her racing heart. She returned to the team. Captain Marshall slung over her shoulder, nearly unconscious from blood loss. In her other hand, she held her rifle, firing cover for the retreating soldiers. She didn't shout orders, she didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder. The soldiers who'd mocked her minutes before now stared with eyes changed. Not admiration, not yet, but shock mixed with shame. She led the team to a safer position, a small rock alcove offering temporary cover. She set Marshall down, checked his wound, and directed another soldier to apply pressure. She assessed the other injured, ensuring they were stable, all while keeping her rifle ready. No one in the team could meet her gaze. Carter, who'd taunted her, sat silent, hands trembling as he wiped blood from his jacket. Natalie said nothing about what she'd done. She didn't need to. The ravine, with its smoke and blood, told its own story. She turned to scan the terrain, ensuring no further threats loomed. She knew the danger wasn't over, but in that moment, she'd changed everything. Not by proving them wrong, but by keeping them alive. She stood there, a small figure amid the wreckage, but no one dared underestimate her anymore. And in the heavy silence, a truth took shape. Natalie Raines wasn't just a soldier. She was the one ready to face the darkness when all else fell. The ravine was now a mess of smoke, shattered rock, and blood dried into the dirt. The gunfire had stopped, but the silence that followed was heavier than the blasts. The Special Forces team, or what remained of it, huddled in a small rock alcove where Natalie Raines had led them to escape further attacks. 6 survivors, 2 gone forever. Captain Marshall leaned against the cliff, face pale but alert, saved by Natalie's quick first aid. No one spoke. No one dared meet each other's eyes, and especially not hers. Natalie stood there, checking her gear, her expression calm as if she'd just finished a routine drill. Her rifle rested steady in her hands, its scope spotless despite the life-or-death fight. She scanned the team, ensuring everyone was stable. Then turned to survey the terrain ahead. No sign of the enemy, for now. But she knew this safety was fleeting. She didn't relax. Not for a second. She'd done what no one else in the team could, stood firm when everything collapsed, and pulled them back from the edge of death. The remaining soldiers, the ones who'd mocked her, sat in silence, their eyes hollow. Carter, who'd called her female Rambo, stared at the ground, hands still stained with the blood of a teammate who didn't make it. He said nothing, but his trembling hands spoke volumes. The taunts, the dismissive glances, now weighed like stones in their chests. Natalie didn't look at them, didn't blame, didn't gloat. She just did her job, as she always had. Captain Marshall, weakened by his wound, motioned her closer. He didn't say much, his voice hoarse but heavy with meaning. "Raines," he said, "you did well." 4 words, but from a man like Marshall, they were a proclamation. He pulled a unit patch from his pocket, a small piece of fabric, caked with mud and blood, but carrying the weight of the team. He pinned it to her uniform, his movement slow but deliberate. No explanation, no need for one. It was his way of acknowledging not just the team's survival, but her role in making it happen. There was no applause, no loud praise. Just a nod from Marshall, a look from the others, and a firm handshake from a young sergeant who'd been silent since the retreat. His eyes, for the first time, held no doubt. It was acknowledgement, wordless but deeper than any speech. Natalie returned the handshake, nodded slightly, and went back to work. She didn't need their words. She saw the change in their eyes, and that was enough. When the rescue helicopter finally arrived, the sky had turned the burning orange of dusk. Natalie was the last to board, after ensuring everyone else was safe. She sat quietly in the cabin, staring out as the barren hills faded into the distance. No one on the team spoke of what happened, and no one mentioned the earlier taunts. But there was a different silence now, not one of doubt, but of respect. They didn't need to say it, but they knew without her. None of them would be on this flight. Natalie didn't dwell on what she'd done. She didn't think about proving them wrong or changing how they saw her. She thought only of the mission, of what she was trained to do, protect her team, no matter what they thought of her. She glanced at the patch on her uniform, still flecked with dried mud. It wasn't a medal, not a reward. It was a reminder that in places like this, actions always spoke louder than words. As the helicopter landed at base, darkness had swallowed the region. The team stepped off quietly, faces weary but alive. Natalie walked last, as she always had. But this time, no one laughed. No one saw her as an outsider. She'd become one of them, not by demanding it, but by standing tall when all else fell. And in the silence of the night, her story, the female soldier they mocked, began to spread, not through headlines or videos, but through the quiet nods and knowing glances of soldiers. The military base in northern Syria was cloaked in darkness, lit only by the faint glow of swaying lanterns. The helicopter's roar had faded, leaving a near suffocating stillness. The Special Forces team, or what remained of it, stepped from the aircraft, their weary faces etched with the scars of the battle just survived. Natalie Raines walked last, as always, her heavy backpack slung over her shoulder, her rifle still gripped tight though the fight was over. She didn't look at anyone, didn't seek recognition. She just moved forward, eyes fixed on the camp where the survivors would rest and prepare for what came next. No reporters waited. No cameras captured their return. The story of what happened in the ravine wasn't written in official reports or carved in stone. But it lived, spreading through whispers among units, through quiet nods in the mess hall, through glances exchanged between soldiers. The female soldier they mocked, they said, the one who saved the whole team. No one embellished, no one needed to. The truth, with all its weight, was enough to make the story legendary. In the camp, the air remained heavy. Soldiers sat around tables, bandaging wounds, checking gear. But no one mentioned the taunts they'd thrown before the mission. Carter, who'd ridiculed Natalie, sat silent, his gaze fixed on hands still trembling slightly. Captain Marshall, though weakened by his wound, refused to leave the base until the team was settled. He watched Natalie from a distance, saying nothing, but his eyes carried a respect that needed no words. The patch he'd pinned to her uniform, muddied and bloodied, now stood as a symbol none in the team could deny she'd risen when all else fell. Natalie didn't join the conversations. She sat alone in a corner of the tent, opening her backpack to review her notes and map. She jotted down details of the battle, not to boast, but to prepare for the next time. She knew, in a place like this, today's victory didn't guarantee tomorrow's survival. She didn't dwell on what she'd done or the team's changed view of her. She just worked with the quiet resolve that defined her. A few days later, as the team gathered at the training ground for a new mission, a young soldier, absent from the battle, pointed to an old concrete wall. There, beside a photo of the team before the mission, was a handwritten line, the ink still fresh. "Don't ask who wears the uniform. Ask who stands when all else falls." No one knew who wrote it, but every eye turned to Natalie. She said nothing, just nodded faintly, as if the words weren't about her. But deep down, she knew they spoke not just of her, but of all the silent ones, doubted yet steadfast. Natalie Raines' story never made headlines. No medals, no speeches, no spotlight. But it lived in the minds of soldiers who saw her act, who learned that strength lies not in words, but in deeds. It lived in quiet handshakes, in respectful glances, in tales told by campfires at distant bases. She didn't need fame, didn't need praise. She only needed to know she'd done right, that she'd kept her oath, protect her team, no matter what they thought of her. As the team left the training ground, Natalie walked last, as was her habit. The morning sun glinted off the patch on her uniform, now cleaned of mud but still bearing the battle's scars. She didn't look back at the words on the wall, didn't need to. She'd lived that story, and she'd keep living it, through the missions to come, through days when doubt might return. But now, she knew, no matter how deep the darkness, she'd always find a way to stand, and those who'd mocked her knew it too. The story ends here, not with applause, but with silence, the kind that carries the weight of truth. Natalie Raines, the female soldier scorned, left her mark not on paper but in the hearts of soldiers, and in this barren land, where she proved a hero needs no title, only action. Natalie Raines' story doesn't end in the smoky ravine or on the training ground's wall. It lives on in the hearts of soldiers who witness the power of quiet resolve. She didn't seek the spotlight, but her story reminds us that true heroes need no medals, only a heart strong enough to stand when all else falls. If this story moved you, share it with those who need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories, and leave a comment below. What do you think of Natalie's journey? We'd love to hear your thoughts.